He does what he wants, and he doesn't care who likes it or not.
Coming up on the top 5 reasons you can't blame.
He was a human train wreck.
They knew Dennis Rodman had some screws loose.
We're not going to tolerate uncivilized behavior.
The whole bad boy image, instead of, pushing it away, he began to embrace it.
That ball is on the line. It's 5 up there. Michigan can't take a timeout.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Kenny, and welcome to ESPN Classic's Top 5 Reasons You Can't Blame. While winning 7 straight rebounding titles, Dennis Rodman managed to defy more cultural taboos than Isadora Duncan. And if you don't know what she did, go ahead and Google away in your spare time. Over the next half hour, we'll count down the top 5 reasons you can't blame Rodman for his outrageous shock jock lifestyle. Reasons that range from being abandoned by his father and his coach to his notorious relationships with Madonna and Baywatch beauty Carmen Electra. Before we get down to our countdown, let's examine the evidence against Dennis Rodman.
When he first got to the Pistons, somebody said, who are you? And he said, I'm nobody from nowhere.
He played with that passion, that emotion, that I don't know if you can instill in a player or not. I think it had been locked up in him his whole life.
He came out there and did the things that nobody else wanted to do. He guarded the biggest, meanest, toughest guys. He got in everybody's face.
In 1990, as the Pistons won their second consecutive NBA title, the 6'8" Rodman was recognized as the best counterforce in the league.
The NBA's Defensive Player of the Year, the Worm, Dennis Rodman.
He was the missing link to really become the bad boys of the NBA. Without Dennis, they don't win those titles. They don't go to 3 NBA finals in 3 years.
Despite his on-court success, Rodman didn't have a clear sense of who he was.
This is a guy who never felt like he fit. He always felt, I'm weird, I'm different.
He never developed, his who am I?
Before Rodman could figure out who he was, events beyond his control turned his life upside down. In May of 1992, Coach Chuck Daly resigned. 4 months later, his close friend John Salley was traded, and Rodman's wife, Annie, left with their 4-year-old daughter. In February of 1993, Rodman was found by police in a parking lot. He was alone in his truck with a rifle across his lap.
Rodman has had a difficult and emotional time this season, his mood frequently being characterized as despondent.
Everything was just falling apart. I wasn't going to the parking lot in Detroit to kill myself. I was just trying to kill the identity, the old Dennis.
Instead of committing suicide, he would just decide to kill that person that was the establishment Dennis.
It wasn't until he reached the breaking point that he began to let the wild side out.
8 months after his personal exorcism, the Pistons shipped Rodman to San Antonio. With the Spurs, his behavior became even more erratic and aggressive.
The San Antonio Spurs are having some internal conflict, and yes, it's the Worm, Dennis Rodman.
They go to the playoffs, and I believe they're playing Utah, and that's when he takes his shoes off and doesn't go in the huddle.
We really don't have time for this sort of selfishness, and that's basically what it boils down to.
Some people think he's crazy. Some people think he's the devil. I mean, his own teammates thought he was the devil in San Antonio.
Since his trade to San Antonio 13 months ago, Dennis Rodman has had 3 suspensions, 8 ejections, 40 technical fouls, and paid $54,250 in fines.
Unable to contain Rodman's volatility, the Spurs traded their problem to Chicago, where the embattled forward attacked a referee in March of 1996.
But Ted Bernard, it looked like he headbutted him.
He was right in front of my face, and he was yelling, you suck, you're terrible, and all of a sudden he just came forward.
The Worm slapped with a 6-game suspension and fined $20 grand Monday for headbutting an official Saturday night.
In the NBA, the referee is the authority figure. How stupid can you be, Dennis?
The whole bad boy image, instead of, pushing it away, he began to embrace it.
Being eccentric and being so much different than everybody else, you were concerned that maybe he would do something totally outrageous that might harm somebody else.
Rodman did. 10 months after the headbutting incident in New Jersey, he acted out again, this time by kicking a cameraman during a road game against the Timberwolves.
There were so many episodes with Dennis Rodman, but it was always the violent confrontations. When he kicked the photographer, there's just no place for any of that in basketball.
We're not going to be reinstating him until he assures us, and we're satisfied, that he can conduct himself in some way that doesn't put others at risk.
Whatever David Stern's worst nightmare would be on that given day or in that given situation, Dennis Rodman was going to be that.
Rodman himself seemed bent on self-destruction. He was this figure that everybody viewed as dastardly in all the other NBA cities.
That reputation is one of being a bad boy and being a nasty person, being indifferent. Then all those things fit when you talk about Dennis Rodman.
It would be so easy to blame Dennis Rodman for everything. Why not? As easy a target as there's ever been.
Besides winning more rebounding crowns than Bill Russell and Moses Malone, Dennis Rodman is still, as far as we know, the only NBA player to wear a wedding dress in the promotion of his autobiography. Before we count down the top 5 reasons you can't blame Rodman for his outrageous behavior, here are a few that didn't make the cut. We call them the best of the rest. Phil Jackson. The Bulls coach allowed Rodman to walk to the beat of a different drummer.
Phil had a book that he gave Dennis that talked about an Indian in a tribe that would walk backwards and say crazy things. He likened Dennis to that Indian in their tribe. And it was okay with Phil for Dennis to not fit into the mold that everybody else did.
Phil Jackson took a look at him and saw one of the greatest basketball minds that he had come across, and he realized, I'm going to let this big dog run.
But Rodman's freedom to be himself on the court sometimes proved costly to the Bulls. The self-styled forward was suspended 20 games, expelled from 6 others, and was assessed 70 technicals in his 3 seasons in Chicago.
Dennis would do things, crazy things, get a technical, hit somebody, and Phil used to look at him and smile.
Known as a player's coach, Jackson believed the only way Rodman could play up to his potential was to be given special treatment.
I have rules for you guys, I have rules for Dennis. So they were willing to give up that structure that we have as team rules to accommodate Dennis's, weird behavior.
Our other best of the rest, show me the money. With 2 championship rings, 2 rebounding crowns, and 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, Rodman felt he was underpaid at $2.3 million a year in 1993. To increase his value, he showed the world another dimension to his personality.
If he wasn't going to make what he wanted to make on the court, he'd have to make it off the court.
He knew that in order to do that, he had to step outside the box. Well, he knocked the box down and went into the closet and pulled out some dresses and created a whole new set of characters.
The first thing they did was become a bridesmaid in New York. And frankly, if you ever really look at the picture, he'll never look better in his whole life.
It's a lot easier being this way because it's more, sexier.
We've never seen an NBA player who was this crazy, and he found that market and he exploited it.
Don't try this at home, people. It does burn like hell.
When Dennis got 15 rebounds and dressed normal, he made $2 million a year. And when he started wearing dress and acting, doing his stuff, he made $15 million a year.
So if you're going to blame anyone, blame us for buying into the shtick, but give him credit.
Coming up on the top 5 reasons you can't blame Dennis Rodman for being a bad boy.
One was filthy and one was nasty. We don't know which is which because they came to give you plenty of dirty work.
We're presenting the top 5 reasons you can't blame Dennis Rodman for being a bad boy. We begin our countdown with reason number 5. The Bad Boys. Detroit's veteran gang of tough guys hammered Rodman into their own image.
You played those Pistons teams, you know you were going to get mugged.
They would say that Zeke, Isaiah Thomas, was probably as nasty a bad boy as there was. He would kill you with a smile, and then he'd take a dagger and drive it through you.
Your Rick Mahorns, your Bill Lambiers, Vinnie Johnson, Isaiah, these were the bad boys, and Dennis was the shy guy at that point.
Dennis was just a big kid. He was like a 14-year-old kid. All he wanted to do was have fun, and he wanted to play basketball.
In his early days with Detroit, he really wasn't a bad boy yet. He was learning.
He picked up a lot of nuances, little things, how to give a guy a nudge there, how to pull your trunks over here, how to talk some trash to you, how to take you out your game.
They taught him toughness because when they practiced against each other, they used to beat each other up too.
I was just happy to be there. If you ever look at the videotapes, I was just happy to be there, and I was just pretty much under the guy's wing, and I just embraced what they was doing.
Soon the student outdid his teachers and learned to play a game which its founder, James Naismith, could not have imagined. It was street ball at its nastiest.
He'd do the sneaky little things that irritated the hell out of you. Knocking the back of your knees to get rebound position, you know, grabbing, pinching you.
He was like, you know, that little mosquito in your ear, you know, that you keep slapping, and to the point where it drives you insane.
He brought that mental edge where he was able to really, you know, aggravate the crap out of you.
He was a bad boy. He was a nasty person. But do we blame him or do we blame the system? I would say you blame the system.
That brings us to reason number 4, tunnel vision. Nicknamed the Bionic Man by Detroit coach Chuck Daly, Rodman developed a deep focus, stoked by an even deeper desire to prove he belonged.
Dennis's tunnel vision and his competitiveness caused him to go overboard a few times.
That competitive drive led him at times to go over the edge and to do things about which he ought not to be proud.
There are several points in his career that are well documented where that competitiveness seemed to take over and he crossed the line, and that would be exhibited in headbutting, kicking a photographer. To me, the root of that would still probably be the same trait that makes him so good, his intensity and his competitiveness.
Dennis was like Rain Man. He was so focused on the court, on the task at hand, and that is rebounding and playing defense. He brought such an intensity to those confrontations and those competitions that at times it would spill over.
There's always the difficulty of being so self-absorbed and so self-possessed about achieving your goal that you stumble across the line.
You're talking about a guy that would do whatever it took to win, whether it was taking one of the other opponents and getting into their head and both of them getting tossed out of the game.
If I did anything as far as headbutting or kick a cameraman and stuff like that, it was intentional. It was just more like, okay, I'm sorry about that, but I'm in the focus, I'm in the zone.
Coming up on the top 5 reasons you can't blame Dennis Rodman for being a bad boy. The pivotal role of Daddy Dearest.
He started undergoing some radical change, especially when they got rid of Chuck Daly.
We're presenting the top 5 reasons you can't blame Dennis Rodman for being a bad boy. 2 reasons down, 3 to go. Here's reason number 3. Daddy Dearest.
I love Chuck Daly. Chuck Daly is God. I call him G-O-D, God.
When Chuck Daly left Detroit for the Nets in 1992, Rodman was left without the guidance of a steady hand.
When Chuck Daly is no longer with the team, Dennis falls apart. Why? Because now he feels abandoned again.
It was like his heart shattered all. I think it was like a repeat of his father.
When Rodman was only 3, his father abandoned him, his 2 older sisters, and his mother Shirley.
He couldn't understand why his father wasn't with him. And in Dennis's mind, it was all my fault because his father was gone.
Years later, with Daly's departure, Rodman's childhood wounds were ripped open. Again, he was set adrift.
I could understand how it could happen, and then being his only coach, now he's like being thrust out into society, new teams, new coaches, new situations, and I suspect it was difficult for him.
Then, as the Pistons were dismantled, Rodman sank into a prolonged depression.
All of a sudden, when one of the bricks started to fall, and a couple bricks started to fall, the whole house started to say, oh God, it's like you're lost, and I became lost for a while.
He had reached this low point where he didn't have anything, the basketball, the personal life, and I think that he had to decide who he was going to be.
He didn't like who he was anymore, so he decided, I'm going to be somebody different.
And what he found was he was this guy who was energized and enthused and motivated by being outrageous.
Feather?
Feather. You want to feel it? There you go.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
I just heard somebody taking pictures.
I'm self-proclaimed Dennis Rodman. I'm not Dennis Rodman, the country boy. I'm Dennis Rodman. I could actually stand up for myself now.
Is Dennis Rodman looking inside himself and saying, I hit the bottom, and then I thought, if I'm going to make something of myself in this world, I'm going to have to really do it on my own. Isn't that what he did?
With 3 strong reasons in the books, here is reason number 2. Madonna. Under the pop diva's influence in the mid-90s, the player they called the Worm went through an astonishing metamorphosis.
Would you like to spend any time with Madonna and all? She turned you on?
Oh, yeah, shit, I can imagine I'm her material boy.
Here he is, suddenly, this NBA player who has tattoos and he's kind of a crazy guy. No one really knew about him. He's with Madonna. And that's when all the interest in Dennis really started to pick up.
She's Madonna. No big deal. You wouldn't ask me have I slept with and all that stuff like that. See, that's what you're getting at.
A lot of people said when he started dating Madonna, that's when he started doing all these crazy things, because Madonna is the queen of shock, and she turned Dennis into the king of shock.
All of a sudden, he was the all-time sports freak and one of the great pop culture freaks of the second half of the 20th century.
You can go do any damn thing you want to do in life. I'm going to go out there and be free. I'm going to run wild, naked, no matter what it is. I'm going to do it.
Freed up by Madonna, Rodman pushed beyond the boundaries of acceptable behavior.
Does my nudity frighten you?
No, it doesn't frighten me, but, good Lord, are you getting an erection?
It was the ever-changing hair colors. It was not being presentable upon meeting the president. It was dressing in a wedding gown to his own book signing. It was posing nude on the cover of his book.
I can't blame Dennis for being famous or outrageous because, one, they allowed him to do it. Everybody wanted him to be more outrageous than the next act.
It's all Madonna's fault. It's Madonna's fault, and we're putting all the blame on her.
Next up, the number 1 reason why you can't blame Dennis Rodman for being a bad boy.
He was an individual who did not have a bad bone in his body.
We're counting down the top 5 reasons you can't blame Dennis Rodman for being a bad boy. Here's a recap. Reason number 5, the bad boys. Reason number 4, tunnel vision. Reason number 3, Daddy Dearest. Reason number 2, Madonna. Welcome back. Psychiatrists, moms, and coaches all agree. No matter what color your hair may be, everybody needs love. Now that we've given you reasons 5 through 2 why you can't blame Rodman, here is reason number 1. He's not a bad boy.
Dennis's wackiness and his bad boy image has been harmless. He never strangled a coach. He never ran up into the stands to beat the bleep out of a fan. He never killed a guy.
When you see acts of choking coaches and things that were criminal, Dennis Rodman never broke any laws.
You never see him in stories, him associated with getting into fights in bars and things like that. He just doesn't do that.
I want you guys to have a good time. Till 2 o'clock, all the drinks are free.
He never got into problems with us. The only person Dennis Rodman has ever hurt is Dennis Rodman.
In 14 NBA seasons, Rodman's worst moments were kicking a cameraman and headbutting a referee. Not good, certainly, but not all that malicious when compared to the careers of some other NBA players. Even the assaulted ref, Ted Bernhardt, doesn't regard Dennis as a menace.
I just don't think Dennis is that bad, period. I think underneath it all, I think is a pretty caring and loving guy there. I was just glad that I didn't hurt him, and it really looked a lot worse than what it was.
These were just acts of an individual trying to get attention. And they're not bad, they just were Dennis.
To me, with Dennis, it was all an act. It was all about the self-promotion.
The real Dennis is relatively shy and very soft-spoken. And sometimes you're having a conversation with him and it's almost, you can't hear him because he speaks so softly. And a lot of people don't really realize that because the image they have of him is the complete opposite.
Believe it or not, take away the wedding dress, the colored hair, stuff like that. Normal guy.
Sure, he had his issues, but you want to know something? He dared to be different. He was a nice guy. He gave to charities. He threw the jersey into the crowd each game.
As a human being, Dennis was a character, but a likable character.
I don't give a damn what people think about me at all. If they look at it and really read and really think about what I'm doing, it's not hurting anybody. It's more expressing what you believe and what you feel.
There will never be another Dennis Rodman, but there'll be a lot of bad boys trying to be Dennis Rodman.
You're going to have to learn that there is such a thing as rules, Dennis Rodman. Rules. Do you understand that?
Sure. I understand.
Well, good.
That's the way it is.
Despite suffering the slings and arrows of his outrageous behavior, Dennis Rodman was a major contributor to 5 NBA championships. Whether you approved of him or not, I think we can all agree it's doubtful there will ever be another quite like it. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Kenny.